Hi, my name is Jared Nunn, and I'm the State School Fund Coordinator. We put together this little video to answer some questions on fees and reimbursements for the transportation grant. We added a little bit extra information just for full understanding. So let's go ahead and talk about transportation account codes first. On the left side of the screen, you see the transportation grant portion of the estimates. Now, this gets filled in with data when we are doing the state school fund reconciliation, and this data comes from your financial audits. So once you upload your audit, we start pulling information. And we pull data from General Fund 100, and then Function 2550, which is the Student Transportation Services, and then these objects 100, 200, 300, 400, and then we also pull object 600. Now object 600 is a little bit different because for object 622, which is bus, garage, bus, and capital bus improvement interest, we pull that from all funds because you may be paying for your buses out of a special revenue fund, so we want to make sure that we get all that interest in there. Now, we do not pull from 610, which is your redemption of principal, or from 660, which is depreciation. We do pay depreciation in a different way, and that comes from your transportation reports. So your bus and garage transportation comes from the Form 3171 along with your non-reimbursable miles. So the non-reimbursable mile shows up as a reduction of your expenditures, and those are calculated by you right there on the top of the depreciation schedule. So we just take those numbers and we add them up and we put them right there in the non-reimbursable miles section. The depreciation comes from your depreciation schedule, and so if you have bus depreciation and garage depreciation, it will get split up, and you'll see both of those on that schedule. Okay, let's talk about non-reimbursable mileage. If you record your expenditures for non-reimbursable miles under 125.50, then you do want to report those miles on the Form 581-3171 Bus and Garage Depreciation and Mileage Report. So what's happening is we are giving you a reimbursement for those expenditures because they're on 125.50, but then we're reducing those expenditures just by the non-reimbursable miles. So the net is actual trips that you should reimburse for, right? If you're recording those expenditures in any other fund or function, you do not want to report those on that Form 3171. And if you think about that, I'm not putting those expenditures in 125.50, so I'm not getting reimbursed for them. But then I include those miles on the report, then that's going to reduce my total eligible expenditures, but I'm not getting paid for those expenditures because they're not in 125.50. So make it simple. If you record your expenditures in 125.50, put those miles on the report. If you don't include those miles in 125.50, do not include those on the report. Now, non-reimbursable mileage rate. So that's set out in OAR 581-023-0040, and that gets updated annually using the Consumer Price Index. And we just started projecting a couple of years in the OAR so that when budgeting time comes around, we don't have to say, hey, what's the rate? What's the rate? What's the rate? Right? We have a couple of extra years out there that we're projecting. Now that rate might move by a couple cents, right? Or it's not going to move all that much, we don't think, right? So if you budget at that rate, you're going to be pretty safe budgeting at that non-reimbursable miles rate. Now, the mileage rate allows districts to use the same equipment and staff that they use for regular trips for non-reimbursable trips as well. And so again, we just reduce your transportation grant by those expenditures if they're recorded in 125.50. So we put together a little flow chart that just kind of helps explain it, right? So you say, are these non-reimbursable miles? And if they're not, say no, then you would not include them on your report, right? But if you say, yes, they are reimbursable miles, well, then the next question you have to ask is, did I record these expenses in 125.50? If you did, then you would include them on the mileage report. If you did not, then you go and take a left-hand turn there and do not include them on your mileage report. Hopefully this this helps a little bit in explaining this. One more time, where do we get the data for non-reimbursable mileage and depreciation? It comes from that Form 3171. So you're entering your mileage at the top, calculating out based on the rate, and we're reducing your total transportation expenditures by those non-reimbursable miles. Okay, what we all came for, fees or reimbursements, which is a revenue received for transportation-related expenditures. There are some exceptions that allow for full reimbursement of transportation expenditures, right? So the OAR sets out 5 different programs to receive a patron exception. And so when a reimbursement is received from a transportation expenses from one of the 5 programs receiving that patron exception, the revenue should not be recorded as a transportation fee. And if you don't record it as a transportation fee, it won't reduce your eligible transportation expenditures. Now, those 5 programs are public charter schools, foster care, summer breakfast and lunch program reimbursement, school after school meal and snack program, and the big one that everybody always asks about is the outdoor school. So if you're getting a reimbursement from outdoor school, how do you record that revenue, right? So let's just kind of go through what happens when you get that revenue. So let's say you have a transportation expense that the trip costs $1,000, right? Super easy. You're getting 70% reimbursement from the transportation grant, right? And then you get the other 30% from a patron exception. That's reduces it again by $300, and so your total net district expense would be 0. And so reimbursement for transportation expenses received from a source with a patron exception should not be booked as a transportation fee and do not reduce the net transportation expenditures. And so I'll give you that list again, but it's revenue codes 1411, 1412, 1413, and 1420. Those are the ones you do not want to use if you get a reimbursement from outdoor school. You'd put it in some other type of revenue and it would not reduce your transportation expenditures. Now, if I get a reimbursement from somebody else, why should I bother if it's not going to give me, a full reimbursement? Well, it's still going to help. Okay, so let's go and talk about that same $1,000 trip, right? What happens is you get $300, and so you record that in one of those 1411, 1412, 1413, 1420s, right? And when that happens, we're reducing your total expenditure. So now your net eligible transportation expenditures are only $700. You get the 70% reimbursement on that $700, which is $490. And so your total expense for that trip is only $210, where it would have been $300 if you hadn't got that reimbursement. So if you kind of, move up in costs, that's going to give you more of a net district savings, right, on those reimbursements. So transportation fees are included in the transportation grant calculations. And if the reimbursement comes from a source that does not have a patron exception, the reimbursement is considered transportation fees and should be booked in a transportation fee revenue code. And again, what are those revenue codes? They are 1411, transportation fees from individuals, 1412, 1413, and 1420. And all of these will reduce your total transportation expenditures. And we put those right there where it says fees collected. That's where those numbers come from. One last thing we wanted to add real quick was also summer school transportation. So right before school ended, we had a lot of questions about summer school. The summer school should be included. Why can't we include summer school? So the OAR specifically spells out that approved transportation costs should include those costs incurred in transporting pupils to and from instructional programs during the regularly scheduled school term. So regularly scheduled school time. So September to June, whatever that is, right? Summer school transportation expenditures are not eligible for reimbursement under the transportation grant. All summer school transportation expenditures should be considered non-reimbursable mileage and be included on Form 581.31 if you coded them to 125.50. So again, just a real quick little flow chart. If you have summer school expenditures that are coded to 125.50, then you would include them on the non-reimbursable mileage report. If you recorded those transportation expenditures somewhere else, like the summer school grant, maybe, you would not include them on your non-reimbursable mileage report. If you're a district that charges the full transportation cost to a grant, right? So you're going to charge them the whole amount of the trip, then you would not want to charge those expenditures to 125.50 because you're getting 100% paid from that grant. So you should be recording those expenditures under that grant and then the revenue to the grant, and then it never comes into the transportation grant at all. So a lot of districts charge the full transportation costs. So if you're doing that, they should not run through the general fund and not be considered part of the transportation grant. If you have questions about any of this data, feel free to contact myself or Vanessa Clark, the State School Fund Program Manager. There are emails and our phone numbers there. So be sure and contact us if you have any questions at all. Thank you.